rock bottom once was 3 DWIs, and then it was 4. And then it was a realization, can I hit another rock bottom if I go and drink tomorrow? Oh, hell yes, I can. I was mad at everything. Again, it was mostly myself. I was so hard on myself for that. So how can anybody else come to you when you can't even do it for you? But those two guys tried, and they helped make breakthroughs.
In these conversations, you realize like there might not have been anyone else. And that's what's scary, right? My fear though, or my concern is there are people out there that maybe don't have that. And I just want to find a way to reach out to them and communicate to them and say, hey, one, you're not alone. And two, if you need somebody, there are people that are willing to show up for you. Welcome to Ain't Dead Yet podcast, episode 3. We're so excited today. I feel like we have a guest today that's going to impact so many people, and his story has been so powerful for so many already. His name is Philip Speer. Philip Speer is based here in the Austin, Texas area. He is, from a high-level introduction standpoint, he is owner-operator of Comedor. I'll let him explain kind of the etymology of that word. I've been saying Commodore from day one, but it's cool to learn where that word came from. It's Comedor. It's an excellent restaurant downtown Austin. Yes. He is the founder of Comedor Run Club, CRC, also based here in Austin. He is the Austin chair for Ben's Friends, and he's also on the nonprofit board for Ben's Friends. He's a husband, a father, and a friend. And he's also a brand ambassador for several different brands. I'll let him jump off into that because I feel like he can explain that much better than I can. But we'll get into that eventually. I just want to say welcome to the show. Welcome to Ain't Dead Yet podcast. And I'm so excited to have you here, Philip. From the moment I thought that I wanted to start a podcast and started to connect with people, your name instantly came to mind. And so it just means so much that you would take time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk through your story in hopes of helping other people who might be struggling and looking for someone to look to in their journey. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Trip. Pleasure to be here. Of course, express gratitude for the ability to connect. And of course, I make time for this. Yeah, it's awesome to be able to sit here. I mean, I love the name of the podcast, Ain't Dead Yet. I mean, we're sitting here, we're sharing where we are in our journey in our life, because we aren't, right? We aren't there yet, and we have so much life to live. And every day that we're here, today at least is a beautiful day. So yeah, we ain't dead yet.
Yeah, I love that. And the other high level thing here, and we'll get deeper into this as well, but over 9 years
Yes.
of sobriety.
Correct.
October
14th, 2014.
October, which is, I don't know, kind of cool to connect to. We met October of 2020, so several months into COVID.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk for a quick second on that because I remember, that would have been about 3 to 4 months into my sobriety.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a sober date that you...
I do. July 19th, 2020.
Okay. Awesome.
So I appreciate it. Yeah, it was early on into that, and a friend had connected me with one of the groups that you were leading. Mm-hmm. And I remember so vividly you being able to communicate emotions, thoughts, feelings just so eloquently. And I remember being like, wow, like I hope I can do that one day. I hope that I can talk about how I feel and have it make so much sense. And at that time, 90 days in, 120 days in, I still felt like I was in a bit of a haze.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was like drinking through a fire hose. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this and to maintain this path. But I remember hearing you speak and just being like, wow, like I hope that one day I can get a glimpse of that for my own life. And so I appreciate you, especially being a male, being able to do that. I'm not sure I'd heard a male communicate his thoughts, feelings that well or that eloquently prior to that. And I was like, wow, like that's how it should be. That's how it's supposed to be. And so I appreciate you for that.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. It's super impactful feedback. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. So Yeah, let's dive right in. Let's talk about, kind of the first question or thought process is upbringing, where it all started. Where was that for you?
So I've spent the majority of my life in Texas. I was born in McAllen, Texas, in the super far south Texas, just a couple miles away from the border of Texas and Mexico. Grew up primarily in that area in the valley, the RGV as we call it, the Rio Grande Valley. And I lived in multiple cities around that area. My father and mother were high school sweethearts. They were expecting me in their senior year. My father was 17, my mom was 18. They both finished high school, and then I was born. We stayed in the area. My dad went to, at the time, it was called Pan American College in Edinburgh, Texas, which is also in the valley. And they were together for a few short years after that. They then split, and I stayed with my dad primarily. My grandparents lived in the area too. My grandfather was a Methodist preacher, and his wife, my grandmother, one of the most important people of my life to this day, and always will be. Both of them, but especially her, was a really, really special connection. They were around in the area. It's a multi-city area. All the cities are very close to each other. We didn't often live in the same town or city, but there was a lot of traveling back and forth. And as my dad went to college and figured out what he wanted to do with his life, I spent some time with them as well. They're pretty liberal in their their thought of theology, and we're often run out of some of the small towns in the South, and so they switched from city to city, different churches, and it was just really interesting living all over that part of Texas. We then moved to Austin when I was maybe 10 or 12. My dad ended up going to University of Kentucky in Lexington, spent a couple years there, kind of going back and forth. My mom had moved to Chicago. I spent most of half a year of every year with her, but in different intervals throughout the year, summer, Christmas break, winter break, spring break, Thanksgiving break, any kind of like long weekend. I would go see my mother in Chicago, but was primarily raised by my father and a little bit with my grandparents. We ended up going back and forth from Houston to Lexington, Kentucky for a few years. And then when I was 16, I decided that I was ready to just kind of branch out on my own, and I moved to Austin. And I've been in Austin since then. So I've been in Austin since 93, solo, with a ninth grade education and a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't finish high school. I didn't feel like that was a place for me. It's really interesting because I come from a family of educators. My dad has a PhD and is the dean of the political science department for the Houston Community College. Education is very important to him. My mom's side of the family, a lot of master's degrees, a couple PhDs. My grandfather was a teacher of theology, but he was also, as a minister, he had a master's degree, and his whole life was teaching, and he was teaching the teachings of the Bible. But and so I come from this long line of educators. However, the education system didn't work for me, and I moved to Austin, and that's kind of where my life really, really started.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. I certainly have never heard all of that put into one place, and that's incredible when you, especially like having a glimpse of who you are today, to see that piece. And there's so much more, but it's like, wow, that's incredible. So at 16, you get to Austin. To go for it.
Uh-huh.
What is that like at 16 years old? It's like, is it terrifying? Is it exciting? Is it like I'm free? Like, what are those feelings?
Yeah, all of those feelings. I came here with a skateboard and a backpack, and it was my best friend had graduated high school. He's like, "We're moving to Austin. I'm gonna go to Austin Community College, study RTF, radio, television, film." That was kind of the move. He was also a skateboarder. I'm like, you know what? I'll give it a shot too. Like, I'll go get my GED. It was the summer I was 16 and was going to turn 17. My birthday's in summer in June. So we moved here in May. And then I figured, okay, I'll get my GED, and then I too will go to Austin Community College. And I did that, and I got my GED, and it was something that was pretty easy to accomplish. And I enrolled in school, and I mean, same thing. It was just that system wasn't for me. But I got here with a plan to leave Houston, to leave what was going on there. I did not have the opportunity to go to any really good schools there. Got in some trouble. And when I came to Austin, I was like, all right, I'm gonna try this in a different way. My grandparents were also in Austin. I did not. I moved to my own home with my best friend and like 4 roommates in this 5-bedroom house in East Austin. And I mean, at the time, it was probably like 2,200 square foot house. We were paying like $700 a month for. It's ridiculous when you think about what Austin prices are now. But we had moved here and get a job, ride my skateboard, try to go to ACC, which then I ended up calling almost college. And that didn't work out. And I actually, when living in that home, I would cook all the time for the crew. And I remember one day, my roommate Quentin was like, "Hey, have you ever considered going to culinary school? You're really great at this." I said, "No, I had never considered that." And he's like, "You should consider that." And I began thinking about that, and in thinking about that and doing a little bit of research, I figured out that I should go work in a restaurant before I do anything. And that's when my restaurant career started. At 17, 18 in Austin, I started working in some restaurants, and
that's
the rest
awesome.
Kind of history.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I've heard you speak on this on a different platform, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was something to the effect of there's a few different paths you can take to get into the restaurant industry.
Right.
And you can go the culinary school path and do the education, or and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, you can knock on enough back doors where eventually somebody's going to give you a shot if you're willing to work.
Absolutely. And I think it still is that way. I'm one of the chefs that if a young cook or a potential someone who's potentially going to go into the restaurant business came to me and said, "Would you go to school or would you work?" I would say work. Now, if you need to satisfy something in your life where you need to complete a program, maybe it's because of how you were raised, maybe it's important that your family that you do something like that, go to culinary school. That's great. You're not going to lose going to culinary school. However, if that's not your path and you're looking just for a way to get into restaurants, my experience, not only as someone who was breaking into the restaurant scene, but now as someone who hires people, I look for experience over education. But if you have the resume and you have some of these schools and some of this experience and externships, of course, that's amazing. And I do look at that. But at the end of the day, it's about working experience. And you can get that in a bunch of different ways. But especially back then in the 90s, it was literally knocking on back doors, being like, "Hey, can I come work?"
Yeah. Would you say, because the construction industry is very similar. There's multiple ways to crack into it, but it's really hard to not value experience over education. It's really difficult. Now, certainly education can be a great benefactor to employment. Like, it can be all these wonderful things, but it's really difficult when someone says, "Hey, I've been doing this job for 10 years. It's really difficult to not take them over someone who might say, like, "Hey, I have a 2-year or 4-year degree in this." It's different. And I think that in today's society, in today's world, the more tech-based we get, the more that the experience is going to matter, honestly, like in a lot of these industries.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trade, right? And you learn a trade hands-on. And there are a lot of parallels and similarities to the construction business as there are to the hospitality business. One of them being there's a lot of kind of nomadic or like movement, right? And you have people who go through different communities, different cities, different parts of the country or world, and take that skill and that trade and that experience and then show up and say, "Hey, I'm on the site. I need to work," and often are hired from that.
Right.
So that's very similar to our business. We can go all over the world and find a job.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. So you're in Austin, you get your GED, you're going to the almost college. What would you call it?
ACC, almost college.
Almost college, Austin Community
Right
College.
over here. The Eastview campus.
Okay. You have a roommate. I believe you said his name was Quentin.
That's one of my roommates. Yeah.
He says, hey, like, have you ever thought about pursuing something in culinary, or going to culinary school? And so you start working in different restaurants. At this point in time, were drugs and alcohol a factor at this point in time? Did that start prior to Austin, in the Valley, or in Chicago or Houston, or kind of where did that originate?
It's hard to pinpoint exactly where it originated. I remember at a pretty young age experimenting with alcohol and marijuana. I mean, part of my story is at 13. I mean, in the 8th grade, I was kicked out of school for selling acid. So I have children that age now and older, and to even imagine one of them selling drugs in middle school blows my mind. But at the time, it didn't seem that crazy. Right, of course, right, because I was experiencing it, and it was just kind of, it was a little bit of the environment of where I was, a little bit of environment of some of my upbringing. There were drug use was visible in my upbringing, so it never seemed that wild to me that's where I ended up, and for 13, 14, 15 years old, like in middle school and high school, in Houston, there was a lot of, it's funny because even now, like I say low key drug use, but someone else might look at that and be like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's insane. Right. And it's like, well, I wasn't shooting up or snorting coke, right? I was dropping acid and smoking weed and getting drunk, and that's cool. That's chill. Like, but it's not. Like we know that now.
Right.
And especially as a teenager, and like a young teenager at that. So that was happening. I did get in some trouble, as I said. I mean, in the 8th grade, I was kicked out of school. I was able actually to go back and finish my 8th grade year because some mistakes that the administration had made, and my father being like, "No, this isn't right." Like in the arrest for that, and then the following year, I was doing the same thing, and there was a chance that I was going to be caught again doing it. There was like a rumor mill, so I basically stopped going to school, and that's hence, like I said, my 9th grade education. And then, the following year, I was supposed to start a new high school, and I didn't even go to day one. Then within a few months, we had several months, I had moved to Austin. And when I moved to Austin, it's more of the same. I think I had graduated past the LSD part because it started making me feel really weird. Maybe I had already begun tapping to my traumas a little bit and had some like kind of weird trips, and was kind of, I was over it. It gave me anxiety. But I was a daily smoker and drinker. It's funny, like retrospectively, it was pretty bad, but I never thought it was. And, that led to 20 years of doing so daily. And it wasn't until, and just to jump really far forward, till October of 2014, that I had even considered that I might be an alcoholic. I mean, and that's 4 DWIs. I mean, no joke, double digit jail visits from fights, and I mean, just everything, right? And multiple DWIs, all of that. It still took somebody just being like, you have to see how fucked up this is. And I still was always like, but I'm fine. Like, my career's great. My family's great. I own a home. I have this. Anyways, that's way back in the future. But it's way in the future. But back to that time and when I was moving to Austin. Yeah, I mean, skateboarding every day, working in some restaurants, learning that restaurant culture, which at that time, some of us refer it to like the Anthony Bourdain culture. And I don't know if you have any familiarity with that person, that human and personality and author. There's a book that came out called Kitchen Confidential, which kind of celebrated the pirate lifestyle of the line cook and then eventually chef. And we kind of really, it was like our Bible. It was our Bible of validation. We're like, this is how we're supposed to be. And it was, and especially to be in Austin at that time and work downtown, like this, and to be a skateboarder, and it was this combination of experiences and environment that set me into this heavy, heavy drinking, heavy partying place.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the whole story. And like I said, I'm so pumped we get to dig into this. It's interesting to me, though. You hear a lot of stories, speaking through connection, where people start their drinking or their drug use in the industry, right? Whether that's the service industry, the construction industry, whatever the industry is. And for some of us, that experience started prior to. It might have changed or became, for me, it changed as I got into my industry of what I was partaking in, sort of evolved, if you will, to needing more energy or needing more focus or that sort of thing. Whatever excuse I could come up with to do something.
Oh yeah, we got there too.
Yeah,
we got to the needing of the energy.
Yeah, because if you're partying really hard and you're drinking a lot, it's tough to come out of that on a daily basis in order to do what you need to do.
Operate,
Yeah. And I think that there are certain things in those environments that allow you to do that a little bit better.
Yeah.
The challenge is they're just as dangerous, if not more dangerous.
If not more so. And again, jump to the future. Like I was highly functioning. I was at the top of, at the time, what I thought was the top of the game.
Yeah.
In my career and in the upper echelon of performing in what I did, which was as a pastry chef. And I was, getting lots of national recognition for that, lots of connections all over the country, traveling, doing these kind of high profile events with really amazing, incredible chefs, which I still have tons of gratitude this day to be able to connect with all of those chefs, and getting recognized by the highest tier of recognition in our business. And I was providing for my family at the time and financially, not emotionally.
Yeah.
I didn't realize at that time. But that was enough, because that's not how I grew up. I grew up, my dad was 17 when I was born, and it was us. It was he and I. And so I had gone to another level of being able to provide for my family. And so everything I was doing outside of that didn't matter, because on paper, it was great. And so I would justify it all the time. But yeah, when you're operating high,
yeah.
no pun intended.
Yeah.
When you're operating at the highest point of your career, and you're partying so much, at a certain point there has to be a little bit more than the drinking, and that's definitely some drug use came into play. And I kind of it's funny, again, retrospectively, I look at my teens and 20s as this kind of drunken high skateboarder, who was also building communities in that realm and operating. I was a good skateboarder. I was managing a skate shop. I was managing a skate team. I was doing this while working in restaurants, and it was a huge part of my life. I mean, I'll always be a skater in my brain. And I kind of always prided myself. I'm like, yeah, well, I drink and smoke weed, but I don't do coke. I don't do heroin. I'm good. I don't even do acid anymore. And I would just justify all of this of but everything's fine. Look at my people. Look at my communities. Look at my social collateral in the community. Look at this. Obviously everything's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so in a very relatable experience. It's so difficult to think that it's necessary to seek help when you are operating and functioning. Because on paper, again, like you said, you look at it and you're like, okay, I'm going to work most days. On those days that I'm at work, things seem to be going well. They're, it's successful. I'm doing what I need to do. I'm able to treat people a certain way and behave and all these different things, but I have this separate life almost.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what it was like. It was like I have this life on paper, and then I have this life that happens behind closed doors. And at some point, for me, they kind of blended.
Yeah.
They started to blend, and that's when it probably took up until that point for me to realize, okay, I've got to choose kind of what path I want to take here. But it sounds like, depending on what industry we get into, that that timeline can be pushed even deeper.
Yeah.
Right. Depending on, like construction, for example, is usually a 6 a.m., 7 a.m. type thing till 3 or 5 p.m.
Right.
And in the service industry, the restaurant business, the hours are a little bit different.
Right.
Do you think that those hours being different play into like addictions maybe lasting longer or deeper into people's lives because there's more time in the day, if that makes sense?
Yes, that makes sense. I mean, the way I look at it is, in the hospitality business for most of my career, things have evolved more recently. We'll talk more about that and talk about bench friends and other programs and just kind of like what the culture is today. But for the majority of my career personally, it was not only accepted to be a high functioning, high partying individual. In fact, it was expected and even celebrated by many. I work better this way. I've said that so many times in my career, in my younger years. Like, I work better this way. What do you mean? I remember going and cooking at the James Beard House with the chef I was with at that time. I was the pastry chef. He was the executive chef. It was his restaurant. And I remember going and cooking at the James Beard House, and me and the sous chef being in the backseat of the cab going to the James Beard House, hungover, just shit, being up all night. And I remember my chef looking at him, and he was seething. I was like, why are you so angry? And he was like, I cannot believe that this is the most important day of my career, and this is how you show up. And I remember saying to him, Chef, I work better this way. And he knew I didn't know I didn't. That was just how we did it. And it was like, it was accepted. It was expected. It was celebrated at times. It wasn't celebrated by him at that time, but, yeah. And I spent years and years and years justifying and receiving validation. But much of it, when you speak about the time, is, and this was another justification, like, we don't have other times to connect, right? If we go into work and we get off work 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 12 a.m., 1 a.m. sometimes, what else is there to do? Mm-hmm. That's the mentality. There's nothing else to do. We have to go to a bar. I don't get a happy hour. I don't get a wind down after work. Like, this is the justification to my family, right? To my wife. Like, I too need to go get a wind down just because I don't get off work at 5 p.m., right? I get off work at 11 p.m. I need to spend a couple hours connecting and building community and camaraderie and seeing what other people are doing in the industry and talking about it. And so it was like all these justifications of like being at a bar, because that was really the only place to go, or so we said. The idea of connecting before work was ridiculous because it didn't exist, right? Also, for a lot of us at that time, it was before work wasn't even a thing, because the higher performing chefs in that culture were at work the minute they woke up. And often that was an 8 to 10 a.m. day all the way till 11 p.m. midnight. I mean, they were 12, 16-hour days all the time. So it didn't really exist in that way. It's a little different now. Space is granted by employers and peers, and it's important that you find hours in your day that don't revolve around work. But yeah, when it was all work all the time, and the only time that you had free was bar time, that's what you did.
Yeah, makes total sense, and easy to justify.
Yeah,
right.
Very.
Like super simple to justify. And
yeah.
So I get that, and I don't want to fast forward too fast, but I also I think that there's enough awareness around like the drinking and the drug use and like the hard times. I think it's so important we talk about how do we get to today, like what that recovery process looks like. And I think that it's difficult to talk about that recovery process though without talking about, day one, minute one of that moment of, like you said, it was October of 2014 for you, was the first time that you were like, oh, maybe there's an issue or maybe there's a challenge.
Yeah.
What was that moment for you?
So just a little bit more. I mean, my last drink was my 4th DWI, and it was another rollover accident. I had multiple rollover accidents. multiple DWIs. It was another rollover accident. I remember leaving one of the bars that I was at that night. I had just opened a restaurant. This was my own restaurant, my own namesake. It's called St. Philip. I had just opened that restaurant. We had done the first event outside of the restaurant. And it was a kind of a party event, but like I took it way too far. And this was, and funny, I want to go back. You said something about a second life, and I want to talk about that a little bit at some point. But I had finished up my drink at that bar. I was going to go to this other bar that was on my way home. I knew I had drank too much. I knew I shouldn't be driving. And my justification was like, I'm just going to go to this place. I'm going to get some cocaine. I'm going to do the coke, and then I'm going to drive home, and everything's going to be fine. But first I have to drive to this place. The funny thing is the bar that I drove to was close to my house, and I could have probably just made it home.
Right.
Maybe not funny. Maybe funny is the wrong word. So I drove to this bar. They did not have not the bar, but the people that I was looking for the cocaine did not have it at the time. So I went back to my car. The bar owner, who was a friend of mine, ran out. He's like, "What the hell are you doing? Why we're calling you a cab? No drink. You were way too drunk to be driving." It was like so obvious. Someone who would let me drive drunk dozens and dozens of times before let me, but like someone who had never tried to physically stop me drive intoxicated dozens of times before was like, hell no. Okay. Like I listened to him. I'm like, pretend like I'm waiting for a cab, jump in my car and take off. I did so. Within half a mile, I flipped my car into a live gas main, shut down that whole part of the city. The car's like in the middle of the street. I run. And then I'm found by a news camera. Like the news camera woke me up. It's on, you can find it online. It's very embarrassing. All I remember, I do not remember the news camera waking me up. I vaguely remember telling the cops that they were wrong, that someone else was driving, that we had both run and I didn't know where they were. And then I just remember being walked to the cop cars and looking back and seeing my car in the middle of the road flipped upside down. And that kind of hitting me and just being like, what the fuck have I done? I cannot believe I've done this again. Because I had totaled a lot of cars and been arrested for many, many of those. Never hurt anyone else or myself miraculously. And so that was a really, really impactful moment. The next really impactful moment was when I was at home the next day. Like I had come home, went to bed, woke up the next day, and I had realized that my daughter, who was a sophomore in high school, she and her friends had seen the video, and I had this whole scenario of like the whole school watching this video of her dad being woken up by a cameraman drunk, and somebody that she had been so proud of her whole life, right? Like to this day, recalling that scenario, and granted, I made that scenario up, but recalling that scenario of like, it's like a very visual thing, like my kid being at her locker and her friends watching it on the phone, like just tears me up. And like I've made so much peace with everything in the last almost decade, and including her. I mean, but it's still like those moments of like seeing that car and seeing the video and thinking of her and watching this video. And then like my younger daughter, like I didn't drive her to school for months because I was so fucking embarrassed because everybody had seen this. I mean, it was on the page 2 of the Houston Chronicle. Like it was just like, it was everywhere. And it wasn't really everywhere, but it felt like it was everywhere. And it was in more places that it probably should have been. Stories had come out. Food stories, like food media was like blowing up. Social media was starting to blow up, 10 years ago. And it's like so many opinions and so many comments. And I would get deep in it and read the comments. And I just felt like the biggest piece of shit. And I called my work the next day. I called them from jail, and I like called my number 2, and I was like, before anyone else, it was like the thing I had to do. I was like, I need to call Chef Frank. His name's Frank. I was like, I need to call Chef Frank and let him know this interview's coming in at this time, and this is happening, and this is happening, and that like this and this, and he's like, okay, bro. And then like, I then call my boss, and he's like, this is not the conversation to have right now, right? So I get out of jail. Nobody picks me up. I walk home. My wife at the time is beyond devastated and destroyed and angry and sad and disappointed and confused, right? And all the things. And like I get home and I'm still like, okay, I got to figure this out. How do I save my place in my job? And that's my first priority, retrospectively. I'm like that's those are all the phone calls I made. Those are all the moves I made. What do I do to save my job? Because that was everything to me. And if you would have asked me in that time what everything to me was, I would say my family, my wife, my kids. But obviously it wasn't, right? And so, because I would be like, look, I'm providing. My justification, I'm providing. I was trapped in this job that I was like trying to excel at and trying to justify my issues. And that was just more validation in my book. So I'm sitting on my porch trying to save my job, trying to figure this out. And finally I talked to someone at my work. He's like, you need to be in rehab. Like you have no choice and we're going to figure it out. And so I was like, yes, you're, and I'm my lawyer, you know, because I'm like, how do I not go to jail? Because it's my second felony. It's automatic 10 days time, and then potentially up to 10 years sentence. And so that's also freaking me out. And again, all I'm thinking about is, well, if I go to jail for 10 years, my career's over. And so I get into rehab and I go to La Hacienda in Hunt, Texas. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And I'm still like on my porch making the plans to go to La Hacienda. They are like, we don't have an opening until this date. So it was about 7 days at home until I go there, smoking cigarettes, still kind of freaking out. I'm mad. I'm pissed. I'm scared. I'm not drinking. I don't want to drink, right? Like I am. It's funny because that's another justification I always made. I could take time away from drinking. And when I say time, it's a few days, but like not have the shakes, right? Like, oh, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't drink in the morning. You know, you've heard this story before from other people. Like, oh, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have the shakes. I don't drink in the morning. I don't drink at lunch. I didn't do any of that. So this is more like, well, I'm obviously not an alcoholic. I'm fine. I'm stressed. I need to get into rehab. So even going into La Hacienda, I was not an alcoholic. I was still thinking about, okay, I need to take some serious time off, but like I'll drink again. And that's still my mindset. And it was about 2 weeks into that where it's a rehab, in a 30-day rehab, where I got, there was 4 MDs on site at this rehab. It was a very nice place. I have checked my privilege there. Like, I get it. I'm in this rehab. These doctors are like, you are type 2 diabetic. I was 285 pounds, type 2 diabetic, smoked a pack and a half of cigarettes a day, ate nothing but fast food, drank nothing but Diet Coke. And they're like, had like severe sleep apnea. Like, you're not going to make it. Like, if you continue down this path, you're 37 now, and your body's already like deteriorating, and you're already having these issues. Like, you're going to lose a foot, you're going to go blind, and then you're going to die. And that was really impactful to me. So I was like, okay, I need to make some serious changes. Stopped smoking that day. Walked past what they called the butt hut every time that I wanted to have a cigarette, and walked around their fitness trail up there. The walk eventually turned to a jog, which turned into a run. We'll talk about running later. That's how I was able to quit smoking. Immediately stopped drinking soda, just started drinking water only. And still in my mind was not an alcoholic. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna change these things about my health. I'm going to get more sleep. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to stop eating fast food. I'm going to stop smoking. And then I'll be better. And then maybe one day I can drink again like a normal person. I don't remember what specifically it was, but I remember sitting in a meeting at rehab, and for the first time in my entire life saying, hi, I'm Philip, I'm an alcoholic. And I started crying. And I don't know what exactly it was. And I don't know if it was someone else's story. Like it had to have been a culmination of a lot of things, right? I can't pinpoint why I was like, boom. But I do remember the doctor's note, which was a speech or like a lecture, a lesson they gave at the rehab, made me understand that maybe something physical out of my control made me this way. And so I think there was so much ego and so much will about not being not having like succumb or like to surrender to something and saying, oh, there's a scientific reason, kind of allowed me to accept that I could be an alcoholic. And then I started the like journey, and it was like 2 weeks into rehab. And when I said I had all the doctors tell me I was going to die, then I got the doctor's theory of why alcohol affected my body, my brain, and my dopamine center in the way that it did, how it was an allergen. I mean, I did that a long time. I'm allergic to alcohol, right? That's when I started understanding and then saying, okay, maybe I'll try this thing they talk about, which is the step work.
Wow. Yeah, that's I appreciate you sharing all that so vulnerably. I think that there's so many people that can connect with different parts and pieces of that and really kind of like almost go to that place with you in different ways. And do you remember having times during this process, especially early on, where you kind of felt alone in all of this?
Yeah.
Like, you're kind of isolated. And we'll get into community in a little bit and why that's so important, connection. But from hearing your story and hearing, those different timelines and things that were happening, there had to be points and pieces of that where you're like on an island. Like you feel like you're totally on an island. Do you remember your first point of connection in this process? Was it at rehab? Was it,
I was on an island.
Yeah.
Justifiably. I've worked through all of this.
Yeah.
My wife was done. And she will tell you that this situation pushed her alcoholism farther. And we completely separated. And I was not receiving any sort of emotional support from her, which she didn't have to give me. She also was receiving none from me, right? You know what I mean? And again, all justifiable, understandable. My job, like I came back and I'm like ready to go back to the career that I'd put the previous 10 plus years into. I was a partner in the company. It was my entire life, honestly, and retrospectively, right? They were done with me. And I still had people there and I still had friends there. But like that was over. And that was of all things outside of that moment I told you with my older daughter in school, of all things, that was the hardest pill for me to swallow over everything else. I didn't have that. And my friends who are all drinkers, like my close friends. I mean, I remember one of them being like, you need to stop being so depressed. You need to stop this, stop that. And I'm like, I didn't have them. And I had two people in my life, actually the founder of the company, his name's Tyson Cole, very well-known and successful chef here in Austin and beyond now. And then another great friend of mine and successful chef, Nick Giannis. These two men made a point every day to check on me, pick me up, take me to the gym, take me to lunch, whatever needed to happen. And those were the people that kept me from being completely isolated and alone. But I was on an island. I'd lost everything. The media and greater food community that I had made a place in at the top, I felt completely abandoned by, and some of them completely turned on. Some of it was made up, but I would read the comments in the articles. I would read the comments on the Eater Austin posts and the shitty articles that were written about me. And every time my name came up or something I was affiliated with came up, a link back to that video. I mean, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of them on websites everywhere that link back to that video, and then comments of like, this piece of shit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, I felt completely abandoned. I felt like I had built this whole life on my work and the work that I had done. And granted, like I'm in my ego, I'm in that world. I think it's important, and it is important to some degree, but like, I think it is, I'm in this like stage of complete breakdown, and everything that I had built around that I felt had turned on me. So I was very much on an island. Those two men, to go back to that, they saved me. And they're to this day two of my best friends, and will always be. But yeah, that's what it took. And then eventually I was able to start building a little bit of community and finding some, like, I had to like me again. And there's some videos in that first year. I didn't talk for a year. I didn't speak to anyone for a year, or speak to any press or media for a year. I was angry. I was so mad. I was mad at alcohol. I was mad at the hospitality business. I was mad at the media. I was mad at myself more than anything. But like, I was so angry. And then finally, that first video I did, I mean, I start off saying I'm a real piece of shit. Like, I still wasn't okay, right? A year in, like, it takes, you said, in that first 90 to 120 days, and you still don't really know what's going on. I mean, that first year, it was just anger. I mean, for a couple of years. I mean, I would say year 3 or 4, it was still anger and vigor. So mad, and I was mad at everything. And again, it was mostly myself. I was so hard on myself for that. So yeah, the isolation somewhat did come from a lack of support from people who were closest to me, because they were either done, exhausted, disappointed, or didn't know how to deal with me because I had no support for myself too. So how can anybody else come to you when you can't even do it for you?
Right.
But those two guys tried, and they tried and tried and tried, and they helped make breakthroughs for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting in these types of conversations when we talk about, early on in sobriety, early on in recovery. A lot of us remember those people that stepped up, and they might not even have realized at that time how impactful it really was. But in these conversations, you realize, like, there might not have been anyone else.
Yeah.
And that's what's scary, right? That's what's terrifying, and that's why I wanted to do this podcast.
Right.
Ain't Dead Yet, is because what if they don't have those close friends that are taking them to lunch, or maybe taking them to a support group or to the gym. And this is where this is where another connection we have is that I had those people as well, right? That were like, hey, come do this, or let's go here, or like, let me pick you up and take you to the store. And I had that too. And my fear, though, or my concern, is there are people out there that maybe don't have that. And I just want to find a way to reach out to them and communicate to them and say, hey, 1, you're not alone. And 2, if you need somebody, there are people that are willing to show up for you.
Absolutely. And there absolutely are. And I remember one of the first days I was out of rehab, a chef in Portland, very well-known chef, very successful chef, a great human being. His name's Gregory Gourdet. He called me almost every day for the first couple of weeks and just like, hey, you good? He was in a different city. We had a slight connection from, he had a lot of sobriety, and he's someone I kind of always like mentally looked up to just as a chef. But I think in the back of my mind, it was like his life is something that I wanted, and his life is sobriety. And we would share stories, and it turned out our backgrounds were very similar, but this is somebody in a different city who just took it upon himself, to just call me and be like, hey, you good? And I needed it. And it's something I refer to all the time. Funny enough, fast forward X amount of years, he's a big part of Ben's friends. And that didn't exist at the time. But that's the kind of human he is. And so he's one of the first Ben's friends chefs who was doing meetings, especially on that coast, which is the Pacific Northwest. But yeah. It just takes that. And even like now that we have these meetings that are accessible by Zoom, and like, this would be a good time to talk a little bit about Ben's Friends, which is a service and hospitality business based group of sober individuals. It's a coalition of sober individuals in the food and beverage business. And it's essentially a group or a network of people who are doing the restaurant business sober, or sober curious, on their way to sobriety, hopefully. And I'm sure it's like this in the construction business, but like in the restaurant business, we don't think anyone's like us, right? And I'm sure it's like that in the medical field and in law enforcement, and right. And to some degree, it's absolutely true. Like there is no one like who does like what we do if you don't do what we do. So of course you can't quite understand it. Um, when you have a network of food and beverage professionals that have the same environmental stresses or experiences, the same culture of like it's okay to do this, the same culture of rewarding good work behavior and ethic with alcohol, right? That's another big thing. That was like the reward is often still, but for a long time, really the only reward system in a restaurant was like, you get a beer, good job, get a beer, have a shot, right? Like reward me with alcohol. When people understand that, then you can connect to them, then you can find someone to reach out to. And it's so awesome to be able to have those kind of resources now. So someone in the smallest town in the most rural place in the country can open up a computer and say, oh, here's some other people that I can connect to and get a phone number and just have a phone call. Because even those phone calls from Chef Gregory were so impactful and so important to me. Of course, the physical connection from my friends, Nick and Tyson was also important, but it's like, it can come from anywhere and it can be just that easy, simple connection. I mean, we connected pretty much immediately when you came. You were on your way. You knew you were going to move to Austin at that point, right? And you weren't in Austin yet, and we had a connection, and you reached out like, "Hey, this is," and that helped, right?
Yeah, I
and you weren't working in restaurants.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to talk about. Was the first vulnerable or honest moment that I had in sobriety, or one of the very first, and I remember most of them. I think we all do, right? Where it's like, oh, I have an opportunity to tell the truth here. Might not be comfortable, but like, let's try. But it was actually on a Ben's Friends Zoom meeting. Mm-hmm. And the topic that day was centered around some level of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And I remember I had an opportunity to share. And I said, well, speaking of vulnerability, I just want to let everyone know I'm not in the hospitality industry. Mm-hmm. I'm from the construction industry, and I hope that that's okay. And if not, I totally understand.
Right.
And I remember so vividly you being like, no, that's totally okay. Mm-hmm. You're welcome here.
Yeah. And
I think that that's an important piece in the recovery community is yes, it is Ben's Friends is a group that supports and focuses heavily on the hospitality industry, mm-hmm. but recovery is bigger than any industry. Yeah. And I loved that moment where it was like, okay, I'm welcome here, even though this might not be the perfect fit forever. Mm-hmm. It's a place I can have connection right now.
Yeah.
And that meant the world to me. So I always wanted to thank you for that.
Of course.
And I carried it with me, and it was an opportunity for me to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. And I think the scariest thing for me to tell the truth for so long was the fear of judgment, mm-hmm. and how I would be viewed or what would be said or would I be welcome anymore. Yeah. And so to be able to tell the truth and to hear someone say, no, you're welcome here, was like, oh, wow, like the truth doesn't always come with backlash or bad.
Right.
So I'm so grateful for Ben's Friends for that reason. But to lead into the Ben's Friends conversation, do you think that having those early connections with the gentleman that you mentioned and then the gentleman from the Pacific Northwest, do you think that inspired you to help others? Like, did you know that early on, or did that kind of develop into like, hey, I want to be a part of this movement. I want to help others. I want to support others. I want people to know they're not alone.
Yeah. Yes, it definitely inspired me to be more vulnerable, more honest, and more open with my story, because I noticed as others were, and especially with Gregory, and he shared a lot of pretty vulnerable moments with me. It made me feel more okay with me. Mm. And another chef who would call me and share some of his moments with me was another Andrew Zimmern, another really well-known sober chef in our community. And as these people who I knew but weren't particularly that close to were sharing that vulnerability with me, and the way it was impacting me and making me feel a little bit better about me, I knew that was what I needed to do. And through the program, we learned how important service and fellowship is. And as I was experiencing it on the receiving end and hearing it and seeing it and hearing the stories in the meetings and eventually in Ben's friends, um, I knew that it was as important for me to share as it was to receive, to give as it was to receive. I feel like I've always been a person who has wanted to help people. I've never had a specific mission or goal to carry out. I feel like through sobriety, I've really latched on to the fact that my story can be helpful, but it's also helps me keep my story,
Yeah.
right? Like one wouldn't today one would not exist without the other. If I couldn't tell my story would be different than it is today. So I also appreciate anyone who receives impact from my story or who understands that, we can have so many similarities that can impact each other to do better every day. So it all kind of works together. If
Yeah.
that answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. I find it interesting, and I've been playing with this concept in my mind over the past couple months. I had to give you a little bit of backstory. I was having a conversation, and someone had said to me, like, sometimes addiction is too deep, right? And I started really thinking about that. And you hear stories that could definitely make you feel that way, but then you hear stories where it's like, the deeper the addiction, the deeper the recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to get into that place,
Right.
where it's and spread that message. Like, just because you're maybe deeper in addiction than this person or that person or whoever or whatever, your story has the opportunity to be that much more impactful.
Yeah.
Right. To kind of look at it on the end of, it's always a part of the story, to your point. Like, I'm not here today without that part of my journey.
Right.
And I'm working to get to a place where there's zero regret about that part of my journey. That's a hard place to get to for me, because there's certain things that I did throughout that journey that I don't love.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I feel like in order to get to a place where we can connect with people that are struggling, we have to talk about those things. And it's hard.
It is hard, and it's all relative, right? Like the deepness of your addiction. Like it's like having this conversation with, like, okay, as a father, like having a conversation with one of my children. What's going on in their life is the most important thing in their life at that moment, because it's their first time, it's their first experience with that, right? To me, if I'm not tuned into that, I may dismiss something to my child that is completely life-changing for them or completely impactful or has given them some sort of awakening in something. And I may dismiss it as like a thing that I've experienced dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of times. With addiction and stories and journeys and rock bottoms, like it's all relative. It's a moving target. And it's, so being deep in your addiction versus somebody being deep in their addiction, sure, if you go macro and you're like, oh, they've had more wrecks or more DWIs or destroyed more lives or robbed, ripped off more people or OD'd more. Still, like, it's all kind of from the same place of often trauma or some sort of like some way you relate to yourself or don't. Right. And so it's all from like some sort of isolation caused by trauma. It's some sort of response to how you live life. And so that is inside. That's all I know. I can't know your story. I can't relate to how deep your addiction is, but I can relate to the fact that I'm not okay. And being not okay is just being not okay. And if you take it to a needle or to a bottle, it's still all the same.
Right.
It's still just not okay. My rock bottom might be one DWI. There's somebody in my life who never considered themselves an alcoholic, and they are now facing a vehicular manslaughter charge. and their life is ruined. Is their life is in shambles, right? And it's been a pretty short amount of time, and they're learning how to be okay with themselves again, which I couldn't even imagine. I mean, I think about it and get completely sad. So I've gotten pretty close to this human, and their addiction wasn't as deep as my addiction. Their rock bottom, well, some might say, is the rockiest bottom. But they didn't experience an addiction to drugs, alcohol, cocaine, and then crack for 20 years.
Right.
And it's the most important thing that's happened in their life and the most terrible at the same time. And, you know, my rock bottom once was 3 DWIs, and then it was 4. And then it was the realization that my children are hurt by this. And then it was the realization that my wife didn't want to be with me anymore. And then there was the realization that I had to sell my house and do the this and do the that. And then it became a sad story with all like what do you say, like a country western song, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, all the boxes got checked, and that was a true rock bottom. But can I hit another rock bottom if I go and drink tomorrow? Oh, hell yes, I can.
Yeah. I love this is why I wanted to talk about rock bottom.
Yeah.
Because I think we align in a lot of ways on our feelings around it. I think it takes what it takes.
Yeah.
You know, it's so difficult to sit in a circle and make comparisons of how many times did you go to jail? Oh, okay, you went 10 times. Okay, I only went 4. Right. I only got arrested for this and not that. And I only got, only ruined these amount of relationships or whatever. The thing is, it takes what it takes. And in those moments, a lot of them, for me, especially, like I was like, this is as bad as it can get.
Yeah.
Can't get worse.
Right.
Well, it gets worse.
It does.
Yeah. And I know that's part of playing the tape forward. And I love that you said that. That's like the analogy that I use. I'm aware now, if I start drinking today, there's a really good chance, one, it doesn't end for a while. And it's going to get myself, or I'm going to be in a worse place than I ever have been before.
Right.
And I think that it's hard to live life constantly thinking about that. Like, in fear or running from alcohol. I try not to do that. I try just to have the awareness of, hey, that's not part of my life anymore. Right. It's part of my life in the sense of I want to help people that are struggling with it. But it's not part of my life of like, hey, I want to partake in that.
Right.
Because to your point, that rock bottom is a moving target. It's going to keep moving. It's going to keep shifting. And from my experience and from most of the people I've talked to, it doesn't get better.
Right.
It just gets deeper.
It does. And then it leaves you with a bigger hole in you, right? Because then the shame is back, the humiliation's back, the covering. Look, if we have found this peace, I'm not always at peace.
Yeah.
If we have found this peace in our life, however many years later, and then we go back out, that peace has been disrupted. At least for me, in my experience, like that is what that is going to mean, right? If I am in peace, and I am not always in peace. In fact, I'm in a place in my life today where like my peace is very much disrupted, just through some things that are going on in my life. And like, if I am not more aware of that today, then the chances of that going back out become greater. If I'm not more connected to people in my life who are doing the things that I'm doing, if I'm not attending, it's connection for me, right? Like that is the most important part for me. And I know that if I'm back out, if I get to the place where I'm back out, it's not because I've graduated life. It's not because I've done it so well that I'm ready to drink again. And I think some people have that mindset. And I mean, who's to judge them, right? But like, there's no graduation for me. There's no like, I'm good again. Like if I'm going back out, it's because I'm not good again. And I know that for me. Right. And I believe that to be true for a lot of other people because I've heard those experiences through shares.
Yeah, I haven't heard, and I'm sure the stories exist. I just haven't heard one where it's like, I took X amount of time off, and I went back to it, and I'm so glad that I did.
Oh, I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't heard them.
Yeah.
And they might exist, right?
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
I'm sure they do.
It's
But
just-
I haven't heard many of I haven't
Yeah.
heard them either.
Right.
And I've seen some people try.
Yeah.
And I've seen it go poorly. But again, that's their life, that's their thing. And it is
what it is.
Yeah.
I feel like most of us too on this journey have tried to go through stints of stopping and restarting, stopping and restarting. Or, you know, for me, it was with the drugs and alcohol side of it, at least. Alcohol was my gateway drug. You know, it wasn't marijuana for me. You used to hear about that back in the 90s, especially like marijuana is the gateway drug. And it wasn't for me because I wasn't good at smoking pot.
Yeah.
Like I was paranoid. I freaked out every time. It just wasn't for me. But drinking for me unlocked the willingness, I think, to explore.
Oh yeah.
And through those explorations, I kind of found things that I liked and didn't like. And I think that this is a moment, an opportunity for me to be honest and vulnerable too. In the very first episode, I talked about drinking and doing cocaine. And I had a couple messages, people reached out and said, you know, was there ever anything else? Well, for point of connection, yes. You know, one time in Nashville, I was trying to find cocaine, couldn't find it, but that was the first time I smoked crack, you know? And I was like, okay, I'll try it.
Yeah.
Like, let me go for it if it makes me feel good. Obviously I was drinking and that played a big part in it. And then this same or sort of experience, I tried methamphetamines twice. Tried to snort it once and I tried to smoke it once. And so that I want people to know I didn't leave that out of the story intentionally. It just wasn't a massive part of it.
Right.
But for me, alcohol was the thing that opened up all of those doors. So that's why when we talk about like going back out and drinking, that's what scares me the most.
Oh yeah.
It's everything that comes with it.
Absolutely.
It's not just like the hangover.
Right.
I'm not worried about the hangover.
Yeah.
I'm worried about me not being able to deal with myself or like deal with the shame that comes with it and what that might mean.
Yeah.
Right. That's, you know, when you get to that deep, dark place where you feel like that shame can lead to some pretty destructive behaviors where you're either drinking and using to not harm yourself, right, which is a crazy place to be, or you are contemplating hurting yourself. To me, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road of like, I'm afraid to go back out because I don't know if I can handle that amount of shame, guilt, pressure again.
Yeah.
It terrifies me. So
It terrifies me as well. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, it's almost exactly the same. I tried meth snort. I tried meth smoke, right? Because I couldn't find cocaine.
Yeah.
And I will tell you this, like I smoked weed before I drank, but weed wasn't the gateway drug, right? I never smoked a joint and wanted to go to Fourth Ward at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Right. and bum around some corners looking for something, you know? That never happened. Right. It was after a heavy night of heavy drinking and running out of cocaine.
Right.
And not having the cocaine connection anymore and being like, where can I get this next high, this next like up high? And I don't speak a lot about this part of my story because it is still embarrassing to me. And there's a stigma behind crack and it's like cocaine is upper class and crack cocaine is not. It's all the same shit.
Right.
It's all the same high. And I think that that's really interesting that we still kind of hold on to that. And it's a whole socioeconomic race thing that we don't even need to get into. But beyond that, yeah, I never smoked a joint and wanted to crack rock.
Yeah.
But I definitely drank a lot of whiskey and wanted one. So yeah, I totally agree that alcohol is more of the gateway, and then not to just drugs, to everything, to sex, to like, you know, teenagers having beers for the first time are definitely much more likely to engage in some sort of physical activity, sexual or not, that they normally wouldn't have. And as you get older and as that continues, more and more and more so, right? Sitting here talking to you, I am not going to be like, I'm going to drink and go drive my car. But after I have a couple drinks, I mean, the inhibition's gone. And then you can do whatever. I will try the coke. I will try the meth. I will try the crack. I will try whatever it may be. I never had any, I always wanted to be up.
Yeah.
Right.
Same.
If I didn't want to be up, I'm sure I would have gone the other route.
Yep.
Zero doubt in my mind. I wanted to be up so I could drink more because I liked being drunk, right? I didn't love the act of drinking, but I liked being drunk. I was fun. I was funny. I could talk to people. I mean, now I know I was fucking annoying,
Yeah.
but like, that's how I felt. And I just wanted more of that. So in this case, cocaine allowed me to drink more, or that's what I thought.
Right. And that was a very similar connection.
And talk more.
Yeah, for sure. Very similar connection.
Yeah.
And I just wanted more of it.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to stop. And so it's within that same vein of, I think that same part of us, or a lot of people that have addiction stories, I feel like the part of us that wants that connection when we're drinking, the hardest thing is comprehending that we can also find that in sobriety.
Yeah.
That same connection and ability to have conversation. It just might be in a different crowd, in a different environment, a different location, but the connection is out there. And I think it's important that we, those of us that are in the process or have been in the process, continue to tell people and share with people like, hey, there's opportunities for that connection. Yeah. And it looks different for everyone. You don't have to go to a step type program. You don't have to go to a Ben's Friends program. You don't have to join a running club. You don't have to do any of those things. There's so many different options now.
There are. And any of those, you may go to some meetings and go to and try to get involved in a 12-step program. You may find out that is not your route, but you may meet someone there that, same with Ben's Friends.
Yeah.
And Ben's Friends is not a program, it's a network.
Yeah.
And so, although I know people who have stayed sober from connecting into that community, and only that, more power to them.
Right.
That's amazing. And I hope that through those meetings and through that network, people realize that a lot of this sobriety is working on this, and whatever that may take. And so tapping into a community of others who can express that and suggest that hopefully allows them to work on themselves, whatever that might look like. It just so happens that the 12 steps work for a lot of people, and it's laid out. It's clear. Do this, this, and this. But when you look at what those 12 steps are, it's reconciliation with yourself.
Right.
Right. And connection to something greater than you. Whatever that means for whoever you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about running.
Yeah.
And what it means to you.
I'll talk a lot about running.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that it's cool now to have the connection piece to you quitting smoking cigarettes in rehab.
Yeah.
And like you started walking and then you started jogging and then you started running and that helped you quit smoking.
Yes.
When you got out of that 30-day rehab and back, did running automatically, did it kind of start from there, or did it kind of take form later on? Like, when did that whole process begin for you outside of rehab?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, when I craved a smoke, I would go to the fitness trail, and it was awesome that the fitness trail existed. And it was a little like, it wasn't a track, but it was about a 400-meter loop, and it had like some pull-up bars and push-up planks on there. And I would go, and I couldn't do a pull-up, I couldn't run around the track, but in the next couple weeks, I would start jogging around that, and I was able to make a little bit of difference in my physical ability just in that couple weeks. And then when I got back, like, if I wanted to, once I was out in the world again and had the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do with zero accountability, external accountability, when it came to smoking, because at least in rehab, I told everyone, I'm quitting smoking, I'm doing this, right? I wanted to keep doing the things I was doing. And then those friends of mine also were like, let's get to the gym, let's do some physical stuff, because they knew I had begun this health journey. I lost 100 pounds in a year.
Wow.
And it was through physical fitness. A great way for me to deal with the isolation I was feeling was to run by myself and eventually add one more mile, right? And it turned into running a lot. It was also a time to listen to podcasts, to listen to music, to connect to things that I wanted to connect to at that time. Maybe it was an album, maybe it was a story. And put on my headphones and go out for a run. And again, like there's some privilege in my story. I had a career that allowed me some financial success. I had some savings. I had some partnership in this restaurant group that I was with, and I received a little bit of a cash settlement to be out of the partnership, which I didn't want to be out of the partnership, but I didn't have a choice. Without saying the name of the company, that company ended up selling for hundreds of millions of dollars later, which sometimes stings. But yeah, tapping into the running allowed me to like really start to through the physical discomfort of running, which exists for everyone. I don't care who you are. There is still physical discomfort in running, allowed me to focus back in on me and who I was. And that became my zen. And I would say that running is my zen. Because it allowed me, it was meditative in a way where I could like say, okay, this hurts, but what else hurts emotionally, right? And that was really important to me. And I just kept doing it. And then I decided that I was maybe a little bit okay and I wanted to run with someone. And so I like ran with my good friend Carlos, who is an amazing tattooer and a person in my life who I've been friends with for over 20 years, who has, you know, a few more years of sobriety than me, that I always kind of looked up to in his sobriety, and he was able to do it. And then a little bit later, when I became better of a runner, I connected to one of my best friends in the world today, James Robert, another chef restaurateur who's a runner. I had to work up to running with him because he's a beast. But like, I always looked up to him and I looked up to him way before I wanted sobriety, because he was a culinary director for this restaurant group that I wanted to learn how he did his job, especially so I could kind of mimic what my job was turning to at the time. And so I would meet with him and we would talk about it a little bit. Actually, the man I discussed earlier, Tyson, connected us. And then once I found sobriety and found running, like immediately I was like, I need to reconnect with James. And we see each other almost every day for years. And it's great. It's such an important part of my life. And so like running went from this like thing where I was isolating and looking and thinking about and working on me, to this thing where it was outward and it was community and it was bringing other people in and them bringing me in and creating a much different running experience. And it's amazing how that evolved. It was like punishment and building myself back up and health and losing weight and running to just get out anger and rage that I had. And it was all of these things and like figuring myself out, but maybe listening to a story, but maybe it was like all these things, but it all came back to me. And then running became something that became so much more, and it became community. And that's what it is today. And it's community, and it's bringing other people in, and it's saying, hey, you can run a block. You can run around the fitness track, right? Whatever it may be. And then you can run a mile, and then you can run 2, and then you can run 3. And that's why with the Run Club, we have a 1, 2, and 3 mile route, because we want anyone to run with us. Just like bench friends, you're welcome here. But our mission is to bring food and beverage professionals who have an interest in either beginning or maintaining a health journey to connect around this, but it's also in daytime hours. Because for years, my story was there's nowhere to connect except the bar. There is somewhere else to connect. And for us, it's running. And if you want to try that out, come try that out. And then if you try it out and it's not for you, great. But you've made a connection. You've made a friend. Maybe you learned about bench friends through that. Maybe you're not looking for sobriety, but maybe it doesn't matter, because the connections are made and a lot of those are kept. I've had people that have come and run with Run Club twice that I've become amazing friends with in the long run, just because we connected there. And it's like, to your point earlier, like these places and these spaces exist. And if they're a welcoming space, someone may come in and out, and you may form a connection outside of the need to habitually be a part of that community, right? Although it's very habitual for me.
Yeah, that word, I think that's an important word to discuss, the habitual word.
Yeah.
Because I get the question a lot, and I was going to ask you, do you think we become addicted to fitness, to nutrition, to the healthy side of things? Do you think that's a fair word? You don't? Okay.
Okay, so going back to like what addiction is to me, it is not being okay with myself. Did I treat running as addiction? Yes. Did I replace the addiction to drugs and alcohol with an addiction to running? Yes. You know, it's funny. In those years, and it was years, I was doing things I shouldn't have been doing. I was running the New York Marathon. I shouldn't have run the New York Marathon. I didn't know how to run, right? It took me 5 hours and 15 minutes to do so, and I hurt myself. I was injured. I was going and running more than I should have run, more an unhealthy way. I was running faster than I knew how to run. I was not caring about recovery and shoes and fuel. None of that. I was addicted to going out and punishing myself. I was still in the punishment phase. I was still in the reconciliation with myself phase. I was still an addict. I run healthy today.
Yeah.
And I run better today. And I run with the community today. I am not addicted to running. I love running. Running makes me feel great, but I have to feel great first. So no. And I get that. And I think that it is often true for a lot of people, as it was with me for years. And it wasn't until the last couple of years that I really kind of figured that out. Like, I am doing this as an addict, the same way I might do food as an addict, the same way I might do whatever it may be, relationships. You know, maybe people have stopped drinking and now they have a whole lot of romantic sexual partners, right? It could be a lot of things. You can engage with any activity in a healthy or unhealthy way, and that doesn't have anything to do with the activity. That has everything to do with the inside of you.
Yeah, I needed to hear that on so many different levels. I've never heard it described that well. I think it's the way that you put that is perfect, and I can relate to it, because running for me, and we have hearing your story now too. The similarities to me are wild. But losing 100 pounds in a year, it took me 14 months.
Yeah.
Right. So I know what that's like.
Yeah, I know you do.
And to start running and really not know what I was doing and just doing it obsessively. You know, I remember March, which would have been, 8-9 months into sobriety. I did the David Goggins 4x4x48 challenge, which was punishment. It was pure punishment.
I mean, he's pure punishment.
Yeah, he's got some pure punishment in him. And so for me, I get that. I was doing it in a very unhealthy way. And you know what happened, which was crazy? I kind of plateaued.
Yeah.
Whether I was getting injured, I wasn't getting faster. My volume wasn't going up. I can't say that I was finding more happiness. It was a plateau.
Absolutely.
And I was like, okay, I'm not sure exactly when the shift took place, but I think it was kind of alleviating the pressure of needing to do a certain event or a race in order to prove that I'm worthy now.
Yeah.
To anyone else. Right? It was a separation of that. Yeah. A separation of that ego and saying, no, I love to run because running is fun to me. And it was crazy. As soon as that shift started to take place, it was easy to run a little bit faster.
Yeah.
It was easy to run a little bit longer. And I think it's because that we're still carrying that weight. Right. And until we start to shed that weight or go through that process of really working on ourselves, that weight remains. And I think that for me, and everyone has a different journey with this, and I was going to ask you about it. I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I feel like I could talk to you for days. What helped me a lot in that process was therapy, having a therapist. And it's something I still believe in today. Like, absolutely. I don't think that work's done. It's like graduation, or you talked about, like, I don't feel like I graduate either. No. There's so much there to unpack and continue to improve upon. And I think once we get to a place where we realize, like, we can't do all that alone, whether that's connection to remain sober or getting outside help to make sure we continue to grow. That way we can show up as our best selves for everyone else around us. Yeah. So I was going to ask you if you were a believer in therapy, or if you or a continued believer in therapy, and what that journey might look like for you.
Absolutely. I mean, not all trauma is childhood trauma. we're still experiencing trauma,
Mm.
right? We're still experiencing life on life's terms. We're still, I mean, like the person I was telling you about earlier who vehicular manslaughter in their adulthood, you know, that's traumatic. You know, losing a relationship, is it a death? Is it a breakup, a divorce? Is it, you know, a friendship falling apart? There's still trauma. Is it trauma in the workplace and working in a toxic environment or culture? Like, there's so many traumas that are happening all the time, and if we're not constantly, as you say, unpacking that, processing that, working through that, then it's coming back. And then that's like when I say being okay with yourself. I don't know many people who can be okay with themselves by themselves. It takes some work. It takes some therapy. It takes some real understanding of what the process and processing can look like, and it often takes saying things out loud or writing them down. And so I'm a proponent of all of those things. I think talk therapy has its place. I think that writing and journaling has its place. I created a journal a couple years ago that was tailored to the food and beverage professional, and it's still something that I use and I still have as a product, and people still buy it and connect and relate to it, and it works and helps them. And I think all of those pieces are necessary. I think it's strong relationships. I think it's community. I think it's the ability to go and share your truth. Because the more you share your truth, for me, the more I share my truth, the more it becomes okay. Right? It's not held inside. And every time I tell a part of my story, or I have a new realization of my story, you know, I'm going to walk away from today and I'm going to probably accessibly replay everything I said in my brain.
Yeah.
And I'm going to learn new truths there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's incredible. And I may even listen to this. I might not.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
It's weird for me.
Yeah.
And you're always going to find that. And so the therapy can look like so many different things. And it is so many different things. And the way that it works for you is on you. But absolutely, I'm a huge proponent of continued work on yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. I do not graduate to being enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a reality for me. Mm-hmm. I am constantly experiencing things in my life that I have to go back and work through. And I imagine I will for a very long time.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
Yeah.
Speaking of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual growth, what drives you today? What gets you out of bed today and kind of drives you, motivates you to continue on your path? Like what's the sauce there?
How many Heinz 57 has 57 ingredients, right? Isn't that why it's called that?
Yeah.
It's like a Heinz 57 to see if we're talking about a sauce. There's so many things. And that works for me because of the way my brain works. And that may not work for some people. Some people might say, and like, that's unhealthy. I don't know. It may be unhealthy for you.
Right.
It works for me, or I believe today it works for me. We'll see. Ask me in 10 years if that worked for me. But it's a lot of things. It's a lot of projects that I'm excited and interested with. It's a lot of communities that I connect with and love. It's a lot of friendships and professional relationships that I want to explore and push further. Excuse me. It's my sister having a baby a week ago. It's so many things. I think primarily and most importantly, it is my familial and closest relationships right now, which are with my wife and my two daughters, and continuing to like explore how great those relationships can be, because unfortunately, and this is 100% on me, I haven't experienced a relationship to its fullest ever. And then again, until I'm ready to do that, I won't. So every day that I process and unpack and continue that processing, I have a stronger relationship. And where I am today in my romantic relationship, is incredible, and I never thought I could experience anything like it, and I never knew that's what a relationship was. So it's all of that, and it's, I don't know, life's exciting. Life is as exciting as you want it to be. I have new goals in running that I'm excited to go and knock out, which is why I will get up at 4:15 in the morning to go do that, because that's when I need to get it done. Because the Comedor Run Club is a social community. We are a place for people to connect, to share stories, to hopefully develop friendships, to get some physical fitness in, to maybe try something new. That's not where we train. If I have training and running goals, I'm not going to do it at the run club, because I want people to feel welcome and comfortable there. I don't want it to feel like it's a race or a training group, or you have to hit this pace. No, there's some misconception that you do, but you don't. I want to make sure that if I'm training for a specific racing goal, I'm doing it around other people who are doing the same, because that also kind of pushes that energy to do so. And so, yeah, all of that gets me excited. Relationships, projects, goals, running, that pushes me. I'm grateful to lead 2 bench friends meetings a week, both a local and a national meeting. My life's been very busy recently, so grateful to have some people who can help support that national meeting, like Andrea and Annie, who help me lead those meetings on Saturdays. I want Comedor Run Club. I'm working on that, becoming nonprofit status. I'm excited that this year the Austin Marathon is focusing on the food and beverage professional, and offering half off to any food and beverage professional who wants to enter their 5K half marathon or full marathon. Which is incredible.
Yeah.
And kind of being the one of the few hospitality-based run clubs, we're going to have a big role in getting people excited and signed up for that, I hope, is the plan. We have the Field Guide Festival that's coming up in a few weeks. That gets me out of bed because there's a ton of work to do with that. I like to do the work. I enjoy the work. I enjoy the connection. I enjoy bringing the visibility of our local food system to the world. I am doing a really great project with Rival Motorcycles, which is another huge part of my life, motorcycles. And I'm excited to work on that programming with them. That's to be announced soon. I have a motorcycle build I'm working on right now that's exciting. I mean, there's so many things that, I don't know.
Yeah. I think
I have space for it now.
I think
maybe.
I love that you shared it that way, because what that also does is gives hope. There's so much more to life than where we started, right? There's so much more. And I try to remind myself too, when it gets heavy, of like these 57 ingredients, if you will. I would have done anything for that life when I was at my lowest. Yeah. And it's a blessing. And there's so much gratitude to be had, to be able to have those opportunities and experiences. But what's been so impactful I feel like there's generations of recovery and sobriety. Mm-hmm. What's been so impactful, I feel like for myself and a lot of the generation that's within my generation of sobriety and recovery, is to see people like you do what you do. Mm-hmm. And it's inspiring, and it just gives hope. And I think that hope is the foundation for so many. Yeah. It's the concrete, if you will, of us to build on. Yeah. So it's hope and connection, and there's a lot of things involved with it, but you doing what you do on a daily basis gives hope, because people see it and they're like, man, he's involved with so much, he's doing so much. Maybe I'm capable of a piece of that. Maybe I'm capable of so much and doing so much. I don't have to be who I was, right? We can rewrite our identity today based on what we do. And so.
Absolutely. I mean, you reinvent yourself daily.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I can't reiterate how grateful I am for you to take time to be here today and share this story. I really feel like it's going to help so many people. And you do it, like, again, you do it so eloquently. It seems to the outside, it's like effortless. It's like he's just living his best life, and through that process is helping so many people. So thank you. Thank you. And
thanks for acknowledging that, and I appreciate that. And you know what? I am living my best life. I truly am. And you know what? It's not always easy.
Yeah.
there's still shit. I'm still going through shit. There's still things, there's still mistakes made. There's still things to repair. But it's like now I have some of these tools to not only understand when those things happen, but understand how to work through them and better them. And whether that's something internal as a relationship, whatever it may be. And I think that's like the real magic, right? It's like these things are going to happen. But how do I feel like I am now equipped to handle those things better. And then in handling those things better, working through those things more, maybe sharing more of the story, and other people can be inspired or learn a tool from that too. And I mean, because I'm constantly learning, constantly picking up new tools. No, I appreciate that. I definitely don't feel like I'm eloquent by any means. I feel like I'm kind of a mess when I'm talking kind of all over the place. But that's really great feedback, and I appreciate it. And I'm super grateful to be able to sit down and make time to share. And I'm grateful that you have begun something that'll get other people's stories out there and hopefully find some light. Absolutely, man. Is there to plug in the viewer, the listener to Philip Speer and what Philip Speer's got going on? If it's okay, we can like to put your Instagram handle, maybe a plug to Comedor Run Club, Ben's Friends, all of it. Ben's Friends, all of it, Comedor Run Club, my restaurant, Comedor, our festival, Field Guide Festival, the journal I was telling about, the Mental Mise en Place journal for food and beverage professionals, but really for anybody. I'm actually about to do a blog post for Hoka on it, which is a really exciting opportunity to work with Hoka a little bit. They highlighted the club, and now I really want to take that time to highlight a lot of other food and beverage professionals who are into running and taking care of themselves physically, and eventually, and also emotionally, and some of them spiritually. The Ben's Friends is a huge part of my life, something that I'm grateful to be a part of. I had to beat on their door for a couple of years, and finally it was actually through another running chef in Portland, not Gregory Gourdet, but Gabriel Rucker, who hit up Mickey and Steve, the co-founders, and were like, this is your Austin guy. So that's an amazing thank you. That's an amazing opportunity. And we're doing a big event for Hot Luck. Coming another food festival coming up in May. So, this next few months is full of a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of things to check out and see. But if you ever want to run with us, we run Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 a.m. It's a 1, 2, or 3 mile route. It's a pretty chill run. Show up as you are. Someone will run with you. Someone will stay next to you and connect to some people. And maybe you come every day for a couple years, maybe you come a few times. But the idea is to just come and see that there are other spaces to connect in our business that aren't just the bar. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the root of all of it is we're not alone. Yeah. You're not alone. Yeah. There's connection. And so, man, again, I appreciate it. And we will put all of the different types of ways to connect in the description, in the link. That way everybody can go check those things out. And I appreciate it, man. And we'll see you guys next time for episode 4.